been a project that's been on my mind for a number of years, and seeing it come together means a lot.
We have character in the building, and character's a hard thing to find.
The building is being used the way that it was designed to be used.
We have such a rich texture here in Spokane of historical buildings, and preserving them I think is very important.
We want the Montvale to become a destination in and of itself of Spokane.
I really think this is an opportunity to really bring something special to Spokane, and it's got a lot of great history. As you can see, we've gone quite a ways from what it was. It had been abandoned since 1980, and so we've done a lot of work to bring it back up, do a lot of support work, seismic work, and actually getting fairly close to putting the elevator in. The idea with this is to make this be more of the private, kind of personal lobby, so that you don't have any of our employees looking over your back as you're staying here. It's pretty private, and it'll be set with couches and with some chairs and a big fireplace down at the end. The fireplace will be down on that side, and we'll put some bookshelves up above on the next level, and some chairs, some game tables, and it kind of, we want to make it feel like it's a, definitely a warm Northwest kind of Spokane, and urban place with some of the great qualities of the old lodges. It's such a neat environment, and it's really the only hotel that's got this kind of a lobby. I mean, obviously the Davenport has something that's about 5 times the size of this, but ours I think is a little bit more human scale, and then add that skylight and the natural light. In fact, you can actually see through it. It's genuinely natural light up there.
Rob is extremely passionate about this project. This is probably the one project that he's been the most passionate about, because he really wants to create a unique space in Spokane. He cares about the community greatly, and that's rubbed off on all of us.
I started the company a number of years ago, actually, while I was still at school in California. I bought a little house up near Gonzaga, where I thought it'd be wise to have students living in there and kind of reassure occupancy, which was interesting. And then over the years, just moved on to different things, refinanced that, bought a little warehouse downtown, and then ended up moving to Washington, D.C. for a while. I've done those things away from Spokane, and then when I got back here in '99, I started work on the Holly Mason building, which is where my old high school was relocated for a period of time. And from that project, I was really able to kind of move on.
With Rob, he's got incredible energy, and he's got an incredible vision for this area, this hotel. And so I lend myself very freely to that, because I really like what he sees, I like what his vision is, and I like where he's going with it.
I actually bought the Montvale Hotel in '96 and have held on to it ever since, just trying to make ends meet with it. And it had a vacuum store in it and a place called Music City. There were great old businesses that had been around Spokane for a long time, but a guy that had run and managed a place called Buffalo Billiards in Washington, D.C. came to me and had moved back to Spokane. His family was from Spokane, and decided that he wanted to raise his children here, and started Far West Billiards. And with that project, we really were able to start doing some of the real preliminary work to bring the building back.
Rob Brewster needs a star in the middle of his forehead, because he's a building owner who came to Spokane after he'd been living in Washington, D.C. for a while, where he saw a lot of historic preservation. He saw the Montvale, and thank goodness he did, because the Montvale had been sitting vacant since 1975. Pigeons were living in the Montvale, along with a lot of other buildings in Spokane, and thankfully he spotted the Montvale, and he said, no, that building's not going to get torn down. It's not going to become a parking lot. Let's try to save something that's worth saving.
I think part of my historic preservation bent came from in the late 80s, maybe it was late 70s, early 80s actually. Roosevelt Elementary School was being replaced and eventually was torn down. And I always saw that as definitely a shame that was taken down and replaced by such a monstrosity. But it was definitely an impact. So in as much as it was a bad experience, you could look at it as a bad experience turned good somewhere down the road. And I tend to be real fascinated with the old buildings, partly because of the architecture, partly because of the way that they were constructed. You certainly can't just go decide one day you want to go build an historic building. It just doesn't happen. The project is certainly could not have been done without Spokane Teachers Credit Union. I mean, I think that they're probably certainly the largest contributor, biggest investor in the project, for one. They've been great to work with. They financed the Hutton building as well, and they've done this project. And it's cool to see how energetic and interested they've been in the project.
It was an important project to us because it had such significance to the Spokane downtown area. So when we looked at it, we saw it as another opportunity to continue to build upon the relationship that we started with Rob. We view him as one of the most accomplished developers in Spokane, and so that was another project that we could work with him on in addition to the Hutton building. And we also wanted to be able to contribute directly to the renaissance of downtown Spokane, so this project had a meaningful impact on that.
I have to lend myself to the visions of all of these developers. Their vision and their will is unbelievable. It's something you lend yourself to. You find that nerve that pushes them, that motivates them to do projects like this. And from that perspective, you're also part of the risk, because it is a great risk to take on a project like this.
It really comes down to, this is really probably my favorite of the old buildings. Holly Mason was a great experience. Havermale's wonderful too, but this one really has a lot of things in it that are kind of more personal to me, I think, than just an office building. These are the chains and it's a, what would you call that piece? It's like a big bow that comes out that holds the marquee, or holds the canopy for the building. There's gonna be a great big huge canopy in the front of the building. It's about 20 feet long and 8 feet deep. It'll say Montvale Hotel on it. It's gonna be really kind of neat out front. And these just support the sign from below, and the chains support it from above.
You got to do some massive stuff here to mount it, because it is so, so nice.
I just hope the thing will be held up there. You feel confident in that?
Yes, I will. I'll put my money behind it.
All right, good. There's a lot of money in the sign. You have to stay up.
I went up and looked at the sign. I mean, we can actually go get the sign, but
How's it look?
it's unbelievable.
Is it?
It is just unbelievable. It's just, I mean, it's perfect. It's just absolutely perfect.
In 1889, Spokane had a big fire, and it burned 32 city blocks in downtown Spokane, which virtually was almost the entire city of Spokane, including housing as well. So when that happened, buildings needed to be rebuilt. From about 1900 until 1910, a lot of buildings were built in Spokane that were called single-room occupancy hotels. And the Montvale block, or the Montvale building, which was at that time called the Montvale Hotel, was built in 1899, and was built as one of those buildings to house those people who had no place to live. The Montvale Hotel was the first building on West First Avenue between Monroe and Cedar to be built, and it started the ball rolling for all of the rest of the single-room occupancy hotels that were built that followed later. They're not a luxury hotel. They were not designed to be a luxury hotel like the Davenport with many rooms. They were designed as single occupancy rooms. Now, only one person was supposed to be in the room at a time, and the rooms could be as small as 7 feet by 9 feet or as large as 12 by 12. Some newspaper articles showed what it cost to stay in the Montvale in 1900, and it was 50 cents to 75 cents a night. There were 60 hotel rooms, but there were more than 60 people, because even though the hotel rooms were designed for single occupancy, there were a lot of people that ended up living in each hotel room. Now, the nice thing about the Montvale was some of the rooms were connected with doorways, so it appears that you could actually lease or rent a room, or you could lease or rent 2 rooms, or maybe even 3 rooms. So if a family moved in, perhaps they leased 3 rooms, and they used those 3 rooms for just their particular occupation. The significance of the Montvale Hotel is twofold. Number one, it's a very good and very excellent example of a single-room occupancy hotel, which is a building type not built today in Spokane. The reason that it's a good example is because it's very intact. It has all of the original form, which is a 3-story brick masonry form. It's not reinforced concrete, it's true brick masonry walls, about 18 inches to 24 inches thick. Upstairs on the second and third floor, the atrium is still intact. The mezzanine is intact. All the railings are intact, and all of the stairs that get you from the first to the second to the third floor are intact. The other thing about the Montvale is that it has all of its storefront design somewhat intact. Kilmer Hardware, who had a big store on the first floor, they were there from 1911 until the late 1960s. So Kilmer Hardware was a large hardware store in Spokane, very well respected. And when you ask old-timers who are still living and working in Spokane, they will tell you that Kilmer was a really good place to buy hardware things. So the use hasn't changed. And at the street level, it's still commercial storefronts. By 1974, when we had Expo 74, there were very few people living in the Montvale. But then after Expo 74, it closed down permanently. I think the building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1998. And the building was also placed on the Spokane Register of Historic Places. And in addition to that, it was placed on the Washington Heritage Register of Historic Places. The Montvale, thankfully, was untouched, and nobody tore it down. And so today, we can go there. We can touch it, we can feel it, we can see it. It's how it was in 1899, so it gives us a good picture of what happened in 1899. In the Montvale, it's like a living history museum. So that's a great thing for Spokane. We don't have very many of those, but we do in the Montvale, thankfully.
What we tried to do with a lot of the rooms is connect them so that if a family wanted to come to town, or if it were a group of people that all wanted to stay together and they wanted to have adjoining rooms, they can have adjoining rooms, but they're not so simply adjoining rooms that you can, hear between the two rooms when the doors are closed. More feeling like kind of an apartment. And so in some cases like this one, we actually have the first door to the two rooms is way out here. Now typically it'll be open and kept open for the two users of these two separate rooms. But if somebody wants, they can actually keep the door closed. They'll have a card reader out here. They'll be able to open the door, come down the hall, come into this. This is a larger room than the last one that we were in. This one too will have a queen bed. This one will have an armoire instead of a plasma or LCD screen. But it's a little bit larger room, and I think this is where maybe the kids can stay. And then you come around the corner here. So it's got a bathroom with a closet actually. But you come around the corner, and now this is entering into the kind of a governor's suite or whatever, if you will, into a living area. This is a living room that has 5 windows in it, which is kind of nice, unusual, really light room. Right behind you will be a fireplace, and on top of the fireplace will be an LCD television. So that's the kind of layout here. There'll be couches and tables, pretty comfortable room in here. And then you'll walk into the bedroom, which will have a king bed in it this time, television, and the bathrooms around the corner with the jetted tub. So this is kind of this one and the one above it are the more high-end rooms in the building. And we didn't really want to design it so that you had some $1,000 a night hotel room, because I don't imagine those get filled too often, and I don't think that's really in keeping with the idea of the hotel. But these will be higher-end rooms. They'll rent for more, not significantly, but for more than the other rooms will be. But that also gives you the flexibility of having a couple of rooms together and then having a living room. So, and we have that upstairs as well.
Well, we're in a critical stage with the construction right now because we're coming out of what they call the framing mode. And in construction, once you start seeing sheetrock go up on the walls, then that's a significant milestone for any project, whether it's new or renovation, no matter what it is. And what that indicates is now you're ready to go into a finished state. Finished states often depend on those framing and the rough-in states that occur through the project, because that's a lot of thought process is brought through to how the finish is going to look. When we get into the finish aspect of the project, then a lot of different pieces come into the puzzle. Where before it was just, your rough-in wiring, your rough-in mechanical, plumbing, your framing, all these different aspects. Now we get to a critical mode. Now we see where all the thought processes have worked out to where now everything comes out planned as we see it. In historic renovation, it's important to note that Many of the changes that occur on the job site are those that are done in place as you run along. And so there's fine tuning that goes on all the way through the process, which brings in a certain bit of urgency. It brings it because your timelines are shorter, because you're still trying to achieve a goal that puts the building online, that produces revenue to meet your investors and to meet your bottom line. So right now we're at a critical state because it's now putting in all those pieces before we start covering it up. And then it's critical because now are all the pieces in place that are going to allow us to finish it out correctly so that the vision holds true, and then we follow it all the way out. And there's a lot of different players that are involved at this point that are going to make that dream and that goal come true. It starts to take steps, and each one of those steps in historic renovation become more and more critical. And each one of those steps teach you more about what you're going to achieve and where you've been and the decisions you've made to get there. And then you really start finding out, you know, how cost effective you have been with the decision-making process. Not only the rock foundation that's underneath this building, which is solid, and I mean, we've had guys down there for 5 weeks just drilling it and breaking up an elevator pit. You can't imagine, that's just mining basically. But then there are other aspects too. As the building has gone throughout the years, we've seen, you know, whole structural changes that have impacted the building all the way around. And now we've come in and we wanted to set things straight. We want nice square rooms, nice flat ceilings, you know, nice square doors. And all that has to be tweaked, and as the building settles and as it goes throughout the age of either neglect or transformation through different periods of time as it's been renovated, all those things come into play. So, you know, we've had, you know, such as your staircases and the balustrades and all those things, none of that stuff meets code anymore. So now we have to kind of make sure that we're meeting the intent of code, not only for, you know, building officials, but just to make sure that our own liability is protected. We need to make sure that we're staying still within that historic renovation mode and that we're going to appease the Secretary of Interior standards so that we can be classified as an historic building.
When you do a listing on the National Register of Historic Places, which is the involvement with the National Park Service, there are certain key elements to the buildings that has to be significant. The exterior of the building, you know, the age of the building, maybe who built it, things like, or who the architect was. And in this case, the exterior is interesting, it's cool. It's the first in a series of single-room occupancy hotels that were downtown. It's the oldest existing one, and it was really one of the first ones built downtown. But some of the key pieces are arched windows, which you'll see upstairs, the atrium that we were in earlier, and the stairs. And the stairs were important because they're really about the only thing that was left intact. Everything else got hacked out of here or got ruined by years of neglect. And fortunately, it probably was one of the more unique features when the building was built too. And it's cool. It's very indicative of the way they built stairs back then. And it's open so that you can see actually all the way downstairs, and of course so you can see upstairs. And we're going to try to feature it with additional lighting. There'll be some lighting in the top platform up there, and there'll be some lighting coming down, so that wall will get washed, and then we'll have some spotlights on the stairs to try to make it feel like it's a prominent feature to the building. Since 1993, I think, was the first time I set foot in here as an adult, anyway, after graduating from school. I had bought my first saxophone in the building when I was a kid back in elementary school. My mom took me back down here to buy an alto sax. So I've seen the building over many years, and I've always thought it was kind of interesting looking. It's not the most impressive building from the outside, but altogether, I think it's actually probably one of Spokane's more impressive buildings. You know, you come in, it's sort of unassuming. I mean, it looks like an old Western, turn-of-the-century kind of building. It's got red brick, and it's got some interesting banding to it, and it's got some interesting arched windows, and it's got a nice storefront. But it doesn't really stand out as any kind of a monument necessarily, like the Review Tower might, or like the Fox Theater might. But in a way, because of this great atrium and the way the rooms are laid out, the old stairs that are here, and really kind of the old Western feel to it, I think that as a package, it's every bit as interesting as any other building in Spokane, and maybe some one of the more interesting buildings. When I first bought it, I mean, the place was just a pit. I mean, it had holes, all the windows were broken out, and there were pigeons here everywhere. So it was actually a little bit difficult to see through all of that stuff and really recognize what its full potential could be.
Well, my expertise and my forte is historic renovation, and being involved in the Davenport Hotel project and Legion building projects and many other projects, historic projects here in Spokane. My level of expertise is at the point where projects like this are very attractive to me, and I like involving myself in the complexity of projects like this. We don't call them challenges, we call them solutions that will happen. Challenges, first and foremost, would be meeting the intent of the new codes. Every time we turn around, it's, like putting in the windows, how are they going to look? How are they going to go inside the old framework?
When the exterior is rehabbed, it's really important to look at the windows, because the windows of these buildings are the eyes of the buildings. And in these single-room occupancy hotel building types, windows is one of the very elemental features of the building. The windows in the Montvale were pretty far gone, and they all had to be replaced. They had to be replaced with a window that looked just like the original window. So Rob Brewster went to great expense to make sure that he found a window manufacturer, in this case Pella, who manufactured these windows to look just exactly like the original windows.
Every room obviously has a window. Most of them have 2, some of them have 5, and some of them have 7. So there's a lot of windows. They're all brand new windows. They're Pella windows. They've got aluminum clad on the outside, but the window itself is actually wood with a double insulated argon-filled glass. So we're trying to keep all the noise out, but we'll keep all the character in. That's kind of the motto of the building, really, in a way.
We have been involved in historic renovation of buildings in the Spokane area with utilizing Pella windows over the last 18 years. I guess my job is to make sure that the building has the same character that it had 80, 90, 100 years ago with today's technology. High performance low E glass is a huge benefit to the performance of the building from a heat gain and heat loss. The challenge comes with that product, though, of not meeting the criteria for historic renovations of buildings with reflectance, with color. Pella has a glass that meets that criteria to enable the building to look as though it had single glass in it. The ultimate compliment would be when I have a debate with someone who's been around Spokane for a long time, and they look at a building and argue with me that they're the original windows that were put in, that they've just been painted. And that's when, after we have replaced them, that tells me that historically we did our job to make the building look as though it did 80 years ago.
This gives you a good idea of what the kind of what the bones of the building are like. They're more or less your true 2x4s and true lumber dimensions that you don't have any longer. We actually counted one of the rings back in some of these larger pieces. We cut one of those off a while ago, and then you could see it was a cleaner cut, and you could count the rings back. And the rings counted back about 200 years. So you think that's not even the whole tree, that's somewhere in the middle of the tree. Then you add the fact that the building is over 100 years old, so that tree started well over 300 years ago, which is kind of interesting. And like I said, that's knowing what these trees looked like at the time. I mean, that piece of lumber could be as old as 400 or 500 years old, just depending on what kind of tree it was and when it was cut. But it's a lot of lumber in here that was really well built. Building's got good bones to it.
To get out of here by the end of the second week of November that's a push for you, isn't it?
I would say that's almost impossible. Well, nothing's impossible, but because we have to get one thing done for the next, and
It's the sequence.
yeah.
But if you can start putting the carpet in, the bathrooms will be done. We can start doing some of the trim work and the work on the banisters. I mean, that can happen within starting this next week. Is that what you're thinking?
Approximately, yes.
So that really comes down to painting. I mean, is that kind of what the drywall is slowing the paint down? Is that?
Well, not slowing it down yet, but they're supposed to be done with drywall by the end of next week. We've got it all scheduled out for paint. They'll be finished out the first floor. They've got 11, 12, 14 rooms upstairs that we're ready to go on.
So
Right.
from your end, then, what are we?
Later November? You're thinking later November now? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because we've actually increased our participation, such as with the woodwork and some of the other items that are going on there. We've actually thrown our crew, and not to screw up Vanderbert's schedule, but we've actually thrown our crew in there to put the lid in the first floor. My boys are down putting in the lid in the basement. So we're trying to stay in concert with what John's doing, and we see a window that we can get in there and do things.
And that's been helpful.
Jared's been just like boom right there and getting it done. you know, we are pushing as hard as we can, but a lot is dependent on, like John says, the sequence of things. This has to be done before this gets done.
But I think for Eric's sanity and for all of our sanity, we gotta start looking at
Tie it down.
finding
I
a
want to
date.
nail a date that's real.
Okay.
Because, you know, we can't make any commitments. We can't.
Right, exactly.
We have a lot of planning to do. On
We
that.
can for February, but
Yeah.
so we're just a little bit late. Yeah, well, you know, I guess like most projects, there are variables, and oftentimes things like office space and where something's really been heavily pre-planned, like a residential building, you know, it's pretty easy. You move forward on it, and there's really, you know, the interest that I have. I have a vested interest in seeing it come together, but it's just a plain new building. I mean, it just needs to be done. And in this case, this isn't. This is an old building. It's had, you know, years of neglect. It had a fire in it in the 1950s, and there have been things about it that are challenging. You know, we've had to find certain people to do things. You know, redoing the banisters up here on the next level and then the stairs here took architectural millworks, you know, a while to put together, and it's partly because it's just intricate, and we've had to have it all stripped and redone, and have just taken a little bit extra time. But I think probably more than anything, we've taken both extra care in putting these things together, and we've done some things that I think are going to make it stand out. Ultimately, it's the care that's been taken that probably has been the longest kind of hurdle in the way to making it completed on time.
The people that come to this party, this project, they're not normal tradesmen. They've got to have more patience, more understanding, more experience in order to deal with every time that you turn around. You've got to make something fit, and then you've got to follow it down the road so that every little piece fits, and what you're doing here is going to allow this to happen down the road. So it's a huge, it's a struggle every day. I mean, there are brainstorming and problem solving going on at a level that doesn't exist usually in newer construction, you know, of building construction.
What we're doing at the Montvale is preserving what we had, learning from the past. How did they build the building? Why did they build the building the way they did? What was it used for? How did they make it useful? How did they keep it going? We can learn from all those sorts of questions about how to build a building in the future.
Welcome to the Montvale Hotel, one of Spokane's premier historic resting establishments. As we talked about yesterday, we don't want people just to stay here, we want them to live here for one night.